Around 2.5 years ago, I made a video talking about snow and sand in the upcoming Scarlet and Violet Pokemon games. At that time, we didn't have the games out, and we had just barely gotten our hands on some of the leaks. So we had a general idea of some of the things that would be in the game, and so some of the movesets and whatnot. And so at that time, I was able to look at it and say that sand and snow were not going to be that strong in this metagame. And since that time, there have been some things that I got right and some things that I got wrong. And so this isn't really a reaction video to that video, but I will say some of the things that I was right about and some of the things I was wrong about. So let's just go over that while we watch some of these video replays in the background. Starting off with, I suppose we'll start off with snow. Snow is the one weather type that received the most change in Scarlet Violet, where you change it from being hail, becoming snow. You get the 50% boost to defense on ice types, and it remains to be seen how actually impactful this change would be. And I would argue that it was pretty impactful in theory, but in practice, it was not maybe as impactful as you would like. And the reason for that is if we look at the Pokemon that would use the snow, there still aren't that many Pokemon that use the snow. And we'll talk more about this later, but just to set the initial picture, when we first did took a look at these weathers in the first video, we only had maybe Beartic and Satitan to possibly abuse the snow with Slush Rush, right? And yes, there is Snow Veil and Ice Body, but Ice Body is not really that good of an ability, although I will talk briefly about that here in a bit. But it's not a good offensive ability, and usually weather teams are offensive, and Snow Veil is banned. Now, one Pokemon I was incorrect about was Baxcalibur. I did look at his thermal exchange ability, and I figured that was going to be way better than the Ice Body ability. And I think, generally speaking, outside of the snow teams, yes, that was true. But because Galarian Slowking and normal Slowking were actually pretty decent in OU, and you could pair it well with Baxcalibur, especially because it paired well typing-wise, as Slowking could resist the fighting moves that would be directed at Baxcalibur. Then you can go and get a substitute, a free Dragon Dance, and have leftovers plus the Ice Body healing you. And that was a lot more powerful than I was thinking, especially when you compare it to Thermal Exchange, which is actually a very, very good ability for a physical attacker to have. So I was wrong about that. But generally speaking, Ice Body is not something you really want to be running on your Pokemon, even with the 50% defense boost. And so we're really only left with Slush Rush. So if we look at the Slush Rushers that we actually ended up getting, we got Sandslash, but that waited until DLC. And we got Beartic and Satitan, and that's it. The only other Slush Rushers that exist are Arctozolt and Arctovish, and those do not come back. Sort of makes sense, they're fossil Pokemon. Those are a little bit harder to get to come to DLC, generally speaking, I feel. And Arctozolt and Arctovish are sort of this weird mistake fossil Pokemon that I feel like would be more unique to Galar. Some people want to even have a corrected version of them in future games, and maybe that would make some sense, but at least for right now, they aren't in the game. Those would be potent Slush Rush abusers, or at least Arctozolt would be, right? Arctozolt in the past has done decently when paired with something like a Alolan Ninetales, and one could imagine that Arctozolt would be okay when paired with Chili Reception Slowking, right? But it isn't in the game, and so here we are. Snow has not really improved since then, and weather is generally, I would say, down this generation compared to previous ones. Of course, Gen 5 was the Weather Wars generation, and Gen 6, Gen 7 had Mega Pokemon like Mega Charizard running around, and you had a lot of weather abusers in the Mega Pokemon, so you could do something there as well. Then you have Gen 8, which you get Barraskewda, so at least rain is okay. And you still do have Barraskewda in this gen, but I feel like Barraskewda has fallen off a bit, especially when you consider things like Raging Bolt that are in the tier and Terra Water Gliscor. It makes it a lot harder for rain teams to successfully function. And all the other weathers have likewise taken a hit, and snow is no exception. I would say that snow is... You can tell how healthy the weather is by where the setter is, and NU is where Alolan Ninetales is, and Alolan Ninetales, aside from Chilly Reception, is the best snow setter. And so the fact that Alolan Ninetales is all the way down in NU speaks to Light Clay being banned in higher tiers like Ario, and it also speaks to snow just not being good, generally speaking. Now, you can use snow teams with just maybe one abuser, and that's what you're seeing on the screen. Right now, Titan is an NU, and Alolan Ninetales just dropped, so now Titan becomes a lot more scary when it has a very good speed tier under snow conditions. Pair that with the defense boost, a potential Aurora Veil to set up with, and Titan can get set up very easily in NU. So snow isn't too bad in NU, but most weathers end up being broken by the time you get down to NU. If we're talking about OU or even UU, snow is not doing so hot, and the real reason is there are no abusers. There is not a single Pokemon or a single ability that gets an attack raise or a damage output increase from snow. Right? Ice types don't get an attack boost in the snow, and there is no ability like Sand Force that boosts ice moves in snow either. That doesn't exist. And so your threat, the threat of the Pokemon is only proportional to the amount of damage you can put out when its speed is boosted, because that's really the only offensive thing you can do with snow. And you can't really boost your attack without wasting a turn, so Sandslash can Swords Dance, Titan can Belly Drum, and Beartic can also Swords Dance. But then I have an extra turn to change the weather, or to roar you out, or to encore you, or do whatever I want to disrupt your setup. Even if you do get set up, something like Sandslash is actually pretty weak, and Beartic and Titan are decently strong, but maybe I have a bulky water type that can eat the hit. If I'm an OU or UU, I have something like Dondozo. It's not doing anything at all. So if it's snow, not doing so hot at the moment. Now let's talk about sand a bit. Sand is basically in the same position that I expected it to be from the beginning. I think I got sand pretty well narrowed down in the original video. I will say that I did not get the Last Respects part correct. I was saying that Last Respects would not be that good of a move on a sand team. Obviously, as a last ditch move, Last Respects is really powerful. But I was thinking that if I want to be on a sand team, I want to be able to come out immediately and be a threat. I don't want to have to hang in the back until all my friends are dead. But what I wasn't considering, and what really would have made it fine for a sand team in general, is the fact that if I even have one guy dead, I'm already a base 100 ghost type move with no drawbacks. But that's pretty decently powerful. So I should have respected that a bit more, and that's going to be better than Phantom Force 100% of the time. Of course, with DLC, we did get Poltergeist on the Houndstone, so that does make Houndstone decently usable in sand. Because Houndstone with a Choice Band isn't like that weak. Then you have Body Press and Trick and Destiny Bond and other things you can do with even a banded Houndstone that can get rid of some of the guys that would actually be stopping your team from sweeping on a sand team. But sand sort of suffers a similar problem compared to Snow. Snow has Slowking and it has Ninetales, which are decent Snow setters. And Sand has Pokemon like Tyranitar and Hippowdon, and even to a lesser extent Gigalith, which are all decent Snow setters as well. So the setters aren't the problem, it's the abusers. Now, we've previously mentioned that Sand Rush is a thing, and we also have Sand Force. So there's no way to inherently boost your attack like there is with Sun and with Rain. Rain and Sun give a 50% boost to water moves and fire moves. There is no boost that you get for Sand, but they at least have the Sand Force ability that you can play around with. If we consider the Sand Force users, however, there's 2 or 3 different archetypes. You have the Mega Pokemon, like Steelix and Garchomp. Those are gone. You have Pokemon that are actually setters, like Hippowdon and Gigalith. And it's like, well, I can't use those, because those are supposed to be the guys to set up the sand. And then you have slow, bulky Pokemon that has no business being on a sand team, like Gastrodon, especially because Gastrodon would prefer to be running Storm Drain, so that you can protect your allies from water types. And Probopass, which is garbage. Landers would prefer to use Sheer Force and is usually banned to Ubers anyway. So really, all we have is Dugtrio and Excadrill. And at the beginning of the game, we did not have Excadrill. Fortunately, we got it in the DLC, and I think Excadrill sort of could save a sand archetype if you wanted to run it. Whereas in the beginning of the DLC, we didn't have anything that was really a threat with Sand Force. We do have a Alolan Dugtrio, and we are using it in today's video, but Alolan Dugtrio isn't really a threat because it has such poor defenses that any priority move basically takes it out. But it is an option. That and the fact that Alolan Dugtrio is just inherently weak. Right, there'll be times where you are set up ready to go with a Life Orb or a Choice Band, and you'll do 95% to your opponent, and then your opponent will one-shot you, and then you're sat here wondering, well, why did I use this Pokemon when I could have used any other number of Pokemon that would have done the same thing? If we look at Sand Rush, trying to get that speed, we do have Sand Slash in the game, but Sand Slash doesn't add anything to a ground team for like Sand, right? Because maybe I have Hippowdon. Well, I don't want to have to add a second monotype ground Pokemon to the team. If I have Tyranitar, maybe, but Sand Slash has the same problem as Alolan Sand Slash, where it's really not threatening until it's set up, and even after it's set up, it's still pretty weak. You don't have Statland, it's not in the game. You do have Excadrill, and we'll talk about him again in a second. You have Lycanroc Midday form, which is not very good. It sort of has Dugtrio syndrome, where it's already fast. Why do I need to have Sand Rush on it? Maybe I'll get the jump on like a Roaring Moon, but I'm not going to even kill the Roaring Moon, maybe. Maybe you would, I don't know. You have Dracozolt and Dracovish, and those would both be potent Sand Rush abusers. Dracozolt especially, because Dracovish would obviously usually be banned, but Dracozolt is not in the game. And we have Houndstone, and Houndstone is an interesting one because it doesn't really benefit from the sand. Now it does benefit from the Sand Rush ability because it doesn't take Sand Chip, and that's cool, but it doesn't otherwise benefit from the sand. It's not getting a Spadef boost, for example, and sand doesn't boost any of Houndstone's damage output, so you're still relying on Houndstone's base attack stat to do damage, and that's not really that bad, but it's also not really that good. So it's not an OU level threat, or even a UU level threat. Again, unless it gets Last Respects, in which case that has nothing to do with sand, it just has to do with Last Respects being broken. So if we want to consider what do we do to help out sand and snow, we need to have good abusers. So the reason why Tyranitar is paired often with Excadrill, and that makes the core of a sand team, even if there's no other sand abusers on the team, pairing a Sand Rush or sometimes a Sand Force Excadrill alongside Tyranitar is because Excadrill is inherently a good Pokemon. right? Excadrill, you're not losing anything for putting it on your team. It's already a UU level threat and can be used in OU if you want. It has rapid spin, it has a good attack stat, it has a decent SPDEF and HP stat, it has a workable speed stat, and if you give it Sand Rush, it's better. And so already people are using Mold Breaker Excadrill. You give that thing speed with the T-Tar and suddenly you actually have something going. If we had more abusers like that, there's nothing inherently wrong with Sand. Now, Snow has a similar problem to Sand where there's no power boost you get from the Snow, and there are no good Snow abusers. Snow is an interesting case where if I use Alola Ninetales with Aurora Veil, then technically I could be argued to be using a Snow team. But I'm not really using a Snow team. I'm just using an expedited screens team, where instead of having to use 2 turns to set up screens, I only need to use 1 turn to set up screens. It has nothing else to do with Snow, so I would not argue that having Alola Ninetales on your team is running a Snow team. That doesn't make any sense to me. So besides Excadrill, and then the fossil Pokemon that we previously discussed, there aren't really any OU or UU level threats that we've listed today. Right? Houndstone is not an OU or UU level threat unless it gets to use Last Respects. Pokemon like Sandslash or Beartic are just not cutting it. We've already talked about how exploitable something like Satitan is, and while it's good in lower tiers, where it's facing Pokemon of its similar power level, it's not really good in higher tiers. Now, we saw that with the defense boost, Ice types could get a bit of a boost defensively, which was needed. I think that's a great thing for Ice types because it's always been basically the worst type defensively, and this really does help it out. Now, I would actually argue that Psychic is worse than Ice defensively. Because if you are worried about your Ice type being poor defensively, you just slap a Slowking on the team, Chilly Reception out. Now all of a sudden, it has double the defense stat. So while I don't think that necessarily saves the Ice type defensively, it does have utility. And I think there are certain situations, like we see now with the Titan being an NU and everybody running Avalugg, right? The defense boost from the Snow, Avalugg says, please and thank you, I'm going to take that, and I'm going to wall your +6 to Titan. And similarly, we see Tyranitar wall things like Blacephalon with its relatively poor rock typing, and it has a niche for that. So I think that the Snow giving the defense boost is really nice, but it doesn't make the Snow archetype really stand out because weather teams need to be offensive. So all we need to do is give me OU level threats that use these abilities. Right? If I want to use Sun, there are the photosynthesis Pokemon, and there are some good chlorophyll abusers that can use it as well, and things like Solar Power Charizard that isn't that great, but it's not bad. And there are some other fire types that really are scary under Sun if you're not prepared for it. Think Typhlosion, for example, Eruption. Rain, of course, is always a good archetype when you have things like Zapdos and Barraskewda or Mega Swampert when it's available. Right? There's tons of Swift Swim abusers, and even though you might point to something like Seeking and say, well, that's a bad Swift Swim user, yes, but Seeking is similar to, well, okay, it's worse than Beartic. But hey, if I'm +2 Seeking and Rain is up, that Waterfall or Liquidation, that's going to hit pretty hard, right? Even though it's still a Seeking, because the Rain boosts water damage by 50%, whereas Snow and Sandstorm do not do that. So they're always going to be behind the curve because they don't get the attack output. But if at least Snow got something like Sand Force, where maybe Ice and Water type moves were boosted, that could be a start. Maybe if Snow and Sand could drop the power output of a full type. I don't know which types those would be. Maybe if Snow dropped, like, what, Grass type output, Fire type output, something like that. just to further help out the typing, but I think all of those are secondary problems. I think you really just need some kind of snow force ability, and you need OU level threats. So as an example of an abuser that would be compelling in the OU tier, let's say for snow, the mammoth swine, instead of having snow cloak, we give it some kind of snow force ability. It's going to have a 1.3 multiplier to ice type and water type moves. Well, okay, it doesn't care about the water type, but its ice type moves having a 1.3 multiplier in the snow, plus it's going to benefit from the snow defense boost. That could be compelling. Maybe you give it snow slush rush as well. Well, of course, that's even scarier, just because a double speed mammoth swine is going to be pretty powerful. That could work. Something for sand, you could definitely let's go a little bit crazy with this and say that we give the paradox Pokemon secondary abilities that are normal abilities, right? They're not running photosynthesis or Quark Drive anymore, and we say Iron Boulder gets to run Sand Force. All of a sudden, it's gonna have a 1.3 boost to its rock moves and to its ground moves, and I guess gonna run Iron Head or something if it wanted to. That would be decently scary in OU. Of course, it does like to have the speed boost from Quark Drive, and that's still something you could consider. But I'm just throwing out Pokemon of an equivalent power level that would be useful if we were to try to fix these weathers, because all these weathers need is abusers. But that's it for today. I just wanted to get this video out because I've been thinking about sand and snow, how they really haven't performed this generation, and we did sort of predict that at the beginning. But, you know, I always like to be wrong about these kinds of things because I do think that sand and snow are sort of the underdogs, and so I'm sort of rooting for them. I want them to be better. They can take on sun and rain and be a lot more balanced in that way. But that'll be it for me today. I will catch you guys next time.